Oops, look like the intro didn't start, but we're on. So, welcome everybody to the Slim Nations One on Ones podcast. And our intro didn't start, but that's okay. We are here. I'm James Slim Overton, and this is, of course, like I said, the Slim Nations One on Ones podcast. And I'm fortunate enough to have a special guest here today, Larissa Reed,
Yes.
and she works for the.
Oh, yeah. Hi. Um, my name's Larissa Reed, and I work for the city of Chesapeake. I work for.
Okay, I think we're back. Sorry,
Oh,
slight interruption there.
okay.
But anyway, hopefully we can go clear without any internet interruptions. But anyway, I'll start again. This is the Slim Nations One on Ones podcast. I'm Slim Overton, and I have a special guest, Larissa Reed, and she works for the city of Chesapeake and the Parks and Recreation Department in the division where they deal with history, history
Yes.
of the city and throughout the Hampton Roads. And I'd like to say welcome and good morning, Miss Reed. How you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing great, and thanks for agreeing to come on and talk about a project you've been working on. First, I want to know a little bit about you. You originally from the Hampton Roads area?
Yes, I'm born and raised from Virginia Beach. So I lived here my whole life. Um, didn't know much about Chesapeake, though, I have to admit. But I've learned a lot more in my almost year since being with the city of Chesapeake. And then I ended up actually going to American University for college. So I spent 4 years in DC, and then I came back home. Um, but yeah, I've really enjoyed getting to learn more about Chesapeake's history as well as the rest of the Tidewater region. It's been really fascinating.
Yeah, so in your position with the Recreation Department under the History Division, you deal with a lot of things. So, but this project came about, and well, I'll ask you, how did this project come about? Is it something that you initiated, or something that the city of Chesapeake said, let's look into this? How did this project come about? And then you can talk more about what the project actually is.
Okay. I initiated the project because one of the sites that we preserve and interpret, being in the Historical Services Division, is the Cornland Schoolhouse. It's a 1902 African American schoolhouse in southern Chesapeake, and it operated from 1903 to 1952. And because of having to learn, everything for that site, because we do tours for various ages, I really wanted to know more about other teachers that were at the other schools because I knew there were several um, schools in Norfolk County, which is the predecessor to Chesapeake. At one time, there was 168 schools. And
Wow.
so I was very fascinated to know more. I was like, there's more teachers, there's more stories here that should be told. And so that kind of led me down a rabbit hole. And I started my journey of researching these teachers. Originally, this project was only supposed to take like maybe a month or two. It's taken almost 6 months, but it was only supposed to be like a couple of weeks to maybe a month or two. And I was originally planning on finding 7 teachers that taught at 7 different schools and having it, each teacher on display at one of the Chesapeake public libraries. And so I thought, I'll just have like a little display there, maybe a couple books, picture of the school, picture of the teachers. But then I started talking to descendants of these teachers and learning more about their lives. And I was just like, you know what, this would be really great to put in a full on exhibit and tell the history of schools in Chesapeake, but also the schools of these Black schools that were in Norfolk County, and also to kind of giving more insight into the communities, that were deeply impacted by these schools. So yeah, I'm very thankful I went down this rabbit hole, because it's been
Yeah.
a really great experience for me just to hear people talk about their family members, and to, learn more also about Virginia Beach, because everything's connected. I've learned a lot of information about the Virginia Beach schools,
For
um,
me just to hear
Chesapeake,
people talk
Portsmouth,
about.
Newport News, and so yeah, it's been great for me, and I'm really excited to share what I've gathered with the public. So the goal is to, once I'm done, hopefully I'll be done in another month, but to have everything put into an exhibit that will be on display in the month of August, hopefully at the Portlock School in South Norfolk. But, so yeah, just really excited.
Yeah. And I can understand how starting out, you can say, okay, well, I can put all this together in a few months or so. And because, it should be all here. And then once you start digging into it, there's so many other factors that came into play, like unequal pay for teachers, and the dedication they had to have in order to, you know, uh, give that time to their students, no, and trying to live on a salary that wasn't fair that other
Yeah.
people were getting, and they weren't compensated for their work. And so all of that came into play as far as saying, wow, there's a lot more to this. And then you mentioned about expanding. You're from Virginia Beach, but all the teachers at that time were going through the same thing, trying to educate us. And the students, and one thing about the students didn't know, well, they probably knew or saw, but all they knew was that the teachers were giving their all, and they were learning and excelling. And many of those students were going on to do great things, even though there were certain inaccuracies in the school system, in their system, in the Black system, school system, but they didn't have everything that they needed. So let me go back to Virginia Beach with you. You went to Virginia. I guess when you went to school, everything was integrated. You know,
Yes.
um, and that's pretty much what you knew.
Mhm.
And if you knew anything, you knew family members telling you about. Oh, I went to Union Kentfield. Which was, I believe, one of the black schools in Virginia
Yes.
Beach. I went to Union Kentfield, and we didn't have everything, but we had the best teachers, and talking about the competition between the schools. We had to travel to play each other. We had to go to Richmond, you know, playing high school competition and things like that. So I guess you heard those stories too. And then uh, that gave you, I guess you said, well, let me go back to some of these people, or if
Yeah.
it's any descendants left of some of these teachers I want to feature, let me see if I can find them and talk to them. And I was one of those people you contacted, because my father started out as educator, uh, and became a principal, and kind of tried to fight for equal pay, and was fired for his efforts,
Mhm.
which I guess that went on a lot. And when I was researching, I saw it got really heavy, but this was all over the country, where Thurgood Marshall
Yeah.
even was in this area,
Mhm.
trying to help out the teachers. It was a disparity, when they're looking at, can you imagine somebody living off $600 and some dollars a year?
No, that would be crazy.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
it's but people may do, and that's the part that is really amazing to me, is how the community ah, banded together, is
yeah.
that the community came together and paid for land to build schools. They
Hmm.
paid for everything to extend the school year. to house people, to clothe people, to feed people. It was a true community effort, and it's like if the county or the city's not going to give it to us, we're going to do it for ourselves. And so just hearing those stories, reading those stories, has really inspired me. And I'm like, this needs to be told, you know, because these stories matter. These stories should not be forgotten to history. Um, and it's totally ironic to me that I've started down this path with all these stories of, these schools, because one of my former coworkers, she actually was a student at Union Kempsville, and I used to talk to her all the time. And she would tell me about her experience going there. And I actually went to the museum when it had opened.
Mm,
Um, but, and then actually meeting someone who was a student there, and learning from her, and then starting in my job with the city of Chesapeake, and then, learning about Cornland, and then that leading me to this project, has been just a really full circle moment for me. And I'm really thankful I'm able to highlight this, because I don't want it to be forgotten. And these schools, unfortunately, especially in Norfolk County, um, they all are demolished at this point, except for two schools. Two school buildings, I should say, still exist. One of them is Cornland, which is also is pre-Rosenwald, and that is believed to be the only remaining Rosenwald school in Tidewater region. And then there's also in Portsmouth, there is the Key Road School, which is, there's an organization that actually owns that and has owned it for like the last 60, 70 years. And so those are the only two school buildings that are left, and at one time, there was maybe as many as 50 Black schools in Norfolk County, a
yes.
little bit more. And so that that's sad, that history hasn't been preserved. And, those stories, unfortunately, too, have kind of died with those school buildings. And as the community, passes away, those stories aren't being preserved. And so, I just feel like, if I can help contribute to getting the public aware of these stories, then I've done my job as a historian and as a, person trying to help the community. I think these stories have value. So yeah, I hope everyone is able to come out and see the exhibit, in August. And there's also going to be a talk that I'm going to do as the opening ceremony, in August. And yeah.
Okay, I think we lost the sound.
Oh no, no,
Are you-
I just stopped
okay,
talking.
you're back. You're back.
Okay.
Yeah, let me ask you this. As a historian, I guess, I want to go back again with you because most people that are really interested in history have had that interest for a long time because when you start talking about history, it's going to involve a lot of reading, and
Hmm.
not everybody reads a lot like that. And in order to pass that kind of information about research and reading takes a lot. Is that something that you wanted to, you always were interested in, like history and reading, even before you got to this project?
Oh yes, definitely. I have loved history my whole life. One of my like fundamental moments I can remember, probably for me, when my love of history started. So when I was like 4 years old, my mom got me this DK, history game, and there were two that she got me. She got one for my age group, which was 4 to 6, and the other one was for 8 to 10 year olds. I always would play the 8 to 10 year olds one because to me that was so much better because that took you through the history of ancient Greece, ancient Rome, ancient China to the Roaring Twenties. And so I used to play that every week when I was growing up, and that just kind of led to me reading books about the Incas and the Mayans, and also listening to stories from my family members, um, and yeah, and just also too caring about even my own family history because I have family that's from South Carolina, and through my dad, he grew up in the country down there. Through my mom, her father grew up in Brunswick County, so I grew up going to see my family there, and they grew up as sharecroppers. So I've always had an interest in learning the family history, as well as learning other types of history, but in that bleeding into learning more about community history and national history. So just all different types of history interest me, and yeah, so reading a lot as a kid, having tons of books, you know yeah, I've loved it, and it's always been my favorite subject in school, and that carried me through high school because I went to Tallwood High School in Virginia Beach, and I went to the Global Studies and World Languages Academy there. And, that was one of the big reasons why I wanted to go there too, is because it had a really big focus on, the world. And we learned a lot about world history, and I love languages. And so yeah, I loved it there. And then going to college, I majored in anthropology. So
Mm.
yeah, so everything has just been history focused for me in my life. So yeah, I love it. I love it. It's one of the things that
Yeah,
I do in my free time, going to museums and yeah, just learning all types of new things.
you, you, I'm never amazed at when I have these conversations with people how early their interests start and, and sort of manifests itself into what they're doing now. And some people don't even realize, until they start talking about it, how early their interest started with the things that they're doing now. Because in between, a lot of other things came into play, but they always circle back to that early interest they had in life. But sound like you were on track all the way
Yeah,
through your education,
yeah,
and it's so important. 'Cause we can't let that education go and that's why I wanted to go back with you because a lot of people know you as an adult, and sometimes it's good to know that person uh, as they were coming up and what their interests were and it's about, and knowing your history gives you a, a higher sense of pride in your family and where you came from and the struggles and the achievements that were made, and it just does something to you to know uh, that people in your family contribute to something, however large or small, you know, and you only get that by knowing the history of your family.
yeah,
And people always talk about know your health history of your family. That's good too. That's good to know too for medical reasons, but it's also good to know that history, some of the significant things. And you might just think, oh, that's just Aunt Alma, but Aunt Alma might have done some significant things that she doesn't talk about unless you research it. Yeah. So I always thought that was interesting. Thanks for sharing
oh
that
yeah,
because it sort of plays right into what I try to do here. That it starts somewhere. It starts early, the interest, and it makes what you're doing now more meaningful to you. It's not just a project. Somebody says in your department, say, "Oh, here you are, Miss Reed. I want you to do this." Okay, I'll do it. But no, it's a certain amount of passion there I can see with you in doing this. So it's going to be make the exhibit better and more interesting for people to see. And hopefully people will see something that might remind them, or it might be about their family that they didn't know about. So yeah, Godspeed to your continuation of finding out what you're searching for.
Thank you.
So, what are some of the things that you have found? During those times, there was a lot of resistance. Of course, you hear about the talk that integration was good, but in some ways it wasn't good because you mentioned earlier. A lot of the schools went away.
Mm.
Why wouldn't integration, keep the schools and keep the history going? But integration destroyed what we're down to just some of the buildings remaining, and some of the schools like IC Norcom and Booker T still remains as high schools, what they
Mhm.
were originally. But most of the schools, either the buildings have been torn down or they've been reassigned to something else other than what their intent was. So what do you find in your research? You find any kind of resistance? Well, there was a big resistance to integration, but
There was.
you know, how what are you finding that was one of the major things? I guess we talked about it. One of the major things that sort of started to decline in our schools,
Um,
we still had the teachers there.
yes, yes, we still had the teachers, and to actually go back to talking about IC Norcom for a moment. So today, and I find this to be such a sad thing. Out of all the high schools that were black high schools in the state of Virginia, only three still exist: IC
Mhm.
Norcom, Booker T. Washington, and the Maggie L. Walker, which is in Richmond, Virginia. That's it, which is insane. Uh, but specifically in Norfolk County, the one black high school that was here was Crestwood High School, and
Mhm.
Crestwood ended up closing in 1971, and
I
then got turned
remember
into a
that.
yeah, and then got turned into a middle school. And so, today I haven't been inside the middle school, but I have been told that there is a display case in there with some type of artifacts from the alumni of Crestwood High. But I always wonder, is do students really know this history, of Crestwood High School? Like, every day as a middle schooler, you're walking through a school that used to be a high school. And when you also look at the photographs of, the white schools compared to the black schools, the white schools were 2 floors, 3 floors, had all these various outside buildings for shop class, for cottages, for home economics. I mean, there was just tons of different spaces for and opportunities for those students as
And
opposed to black
resources.
students. Yeah, resources. There was a big difference, and so when the like Cornland, for instance, when that closed in 1952, there was also 6 other schools that ended up closing in 1952. And so then there was this move from having black schools that were in the community where these students lived, to now these students had to walk or be bused to a totally different section of the city. And so 7 schools, including Cornland, they ended up being closed, and then Southeastern Elementary was opened in 1952. And then eventually you see this consolidation of all these other black schools in the county, go to a few and be in various locations, that's not accommodating for the black community at all. One of actually the predecessor to Crestwood High was Norfolk County High. And Norfolk County High was in a white neighborhood. So originally, because it was in Alexander Park, which was projected to be, maybe there'll be like a white community in there, but it ended up turning out to be a black community. Sorry, a black community to be in there, but it turned out being a white community. And so there were a lot of students that didn't feel comfortable going to a school, which they wanted the school, but having to go through a white neighborhood to get there, um, you know, didn't
Could be
necessarily
dangerous.
allow, didn't allow for the community to be as involved as they usually were, in the school. And so eventually the school got moved and, went to a location where more people could be involved. But, that was very common. And especially after the Green versus County of New Kent, County School Board of New Kent County case in 1968, a lot of the schools started to desegregate. But one of the things was, and specifically in the case of Chesapeake, Chesapeake sent in their school desegregation plan in 1969. And in that plan, they had it where they were going to integrate Crestwood High, because still Crestwood High was a newer high school. They put in
Mhm.
almost 2.5 million into building Crestwood High. So they didn't want to lose the building. And so they were going to integrate it. There was originally in the plan 200 white students that were going to integrate Crestwood High. They sent that off to the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, HUE for short. And HUE sent back saying that no, the black schools need to be phased out. And so that's what led, I guess it's totally not clear to me yet, but I guess the school board came to the decision of saying, okay, we have to close Crestwood High, but they still wanted to preserve the building, obviously. And so they turned it into a junior high school. But, all the white schools in Norfolk or Chesapeake at that point got to continue, you know, pretty much all the white elementary and middle schools got to stay where they were. You did get to keep, these formerly black schools, like the elementary schools stayed around, like Bells Mill Elementary, Central Elementary,
Mhm.
stayed. But by that point, it looked just like the white schools. And so, and also too, a lot of those schools were in areas closer to the white community. So those schools were able to integrate. But Crestwood High, unfortunately, was closed. And Crestwood High was just 4 to 5 years prior to their closure. They had the highest marks of any high school in Chesapeake. And yeah, and so that those stories don't get told a lot about what really happened at Crestwood High, and it being a very high achieving school. Also, a lot of the teachers that I've been researching, a lot of them left, which was very common. I mean, once school desegregation went into effect, a lot of the white schools did not want to hire black teachers. And so a lot of teachers who were great teachers um, ended up retiring or, just going to other different fields. And yeah, so that
Yeah,
part's
I
really
think
sad.
Portsmouth benefited from that because one of the things Portsmouth recognized, the similar things were going on in Portsmouth as far as making those decisions to they tried to close Norcom, but we weren't having it. But
No.
they recognized the value of the teachers they had from Norcom and the black schools. So they just reassigned them to the white schools.
Hmm.
And I'll give you an example. My senior year, a lot of those teachers that we were used to that were taught us more than what was taught in the classroom. They taught us about life. We ended up in our senior year with a lot of first year white teachers, and nothing against that, but to get to your senior year and
Yeah.
and you have teachers that are afraid to be there for one thing because they thought what they thought might happen to them, which is far from the truth. And we ended up with teachers that weren't ready for us as seniors, and after being taught all that long time. But I wanted to ask you this because we had a city manager come through. We had quite a few that come through and was making assessments on buildings, and the Kiro School was one of them. And they didn't know the history of it, so they were going to tear it down. That was, they were just going through in buildings that weren't in use or weren't, they wanted to tear it down. And luckily, people spoke up and said, uh, no, you guys, there's some historic significance there. Do you know about the process? When the citizens might have to go through to get the designation of historic on some of these buildings that we want to save, because sometimes that's the only way you can save them. You know, uh,
True.
it's
Um,
it's a lot that are already torn down, but you still have a few buildings that you might want to save. And if the city council says we're going to tear it down, they'll do it unless it's been designated as historic, and then they can't really touch it.
yeah. So I would say get in contact with the Department of Historic Resources
Hmm.
up in Richmond, and they can walk you through the process of how to, because it's an application process you have to go
Right,
through, and to ensure that you can get that. Because that's the thing. When it's gone, it's gone. And
right,
I it's important. People should look and say, if it's kind of falling apart, because that's actually one of the things that was going to happen with the Cornland School in Chesapeake. And so there were several alumni back in like 2009, 2010, along with some other community members that had always heard about the Cornland School. And as far as students, they went to that school. Um, and it was starting to fall apart, and the city wanted to demolish it. you know but they came together and created the Cornland School Foundation, and for about 14 years they fundraised. They did the application for a
mhm,
historic site, to get it recognized by DHR. And then eventually the city of Chesapeake stepped in and bought it and did the preservation, the rehab on it, and now today it's a museum. And so it is possible.
yeah.
It is definitely possible. But that's
There's the
definitely one of
process.
the
You just
sites. It is a process, and it can be kind of a timely process.
right,
Um, but the main thing is starting the process and, you know, getting community support. Because if the community steps in, then hopefully a lot of stuff can be stopped, and that will make the government have to take notice of, like, okay, this is something that the people care about.
yeah.
Um, but
A lot of times people don't know the power that they have
yeah,
in,
they don't.
in
That's
just
very true.
voicing their opinions and of course voting. But and then if it's saved and designated, then it's eligible for certain grants. If it's in
Can be.
district, if it needs repairing, you know,
Hmm.
along with the fundraising, you can get government grants for it. But
Yeah.
it's important. But I don't know how many buildings are left now in Chesapeake. I think another thing that saves them when they rename the school after somebody, like
I know.
Hugo Orange or something like that,
Hmm.
that might help save the building or name it after former educators or people of prominence. And that helps save the building. I think. Would you
Yeah, it
say that?
does sometimes. In Chesapeake, all of the schools are named after either school board members, former school board members, or superintendents. And there is one named after Hugo Owens, a middle school, but yeah, most of those are newer schools.
That's
Uh,
kind of a new guy, right?
yeah, yeah. There's a lot of newer schools that have been named after um, former members of the school board, um, but yeah, sometimes naming it, can help preserve it. But the biggest thing is getting community support and getting community backing. So then, you can continue to have people to keep on that fight to make and continue to make the case of why this site should be preserved. And the Key Road School, it was a former Norfolk County school that taught grades first through seventh, but also it was a Rosenwald school as well.
Mhm.
And so in Norfolk County, there were 8 Rosenwald schools, and 2 are in present day Portsmouth. It's the Key Road School, and then there was the West Norfolk School. Um, and I believe the West Norfolk School is no longer here. I think it's been demolished, but the Key Road is still here. Um, and so, yeah, I think those spaces should be preserved, and especially looking at other cities and counties that have Rosenwald schools, specifically, you know, there's been cases where they've been turned into community centers. They've been turned into churches sometimes,
Mhm.
museums. So there's lots of uses for them. It doesn't have to just stay as a museum if people don't want it to stay that way. It can be used by the community in multiple forms, but the main thing is preserving it. So future generations can know that history. Because if we don't preserve that history, then it won't be here. All we'll get is maybe a photo of what was. But generations of people went through those schools, and
Yeah,
so
we continuously learn from our history, no matter
mhm,
how old it is, and hopefully that your exhibit will create awareness to people. All the work that you're putting into it will create awareness to people of how important that is, and maybe that exhibit will become permanent somewhere, and history can be added to it. Not just an exhibit you have for a few months and
mhm,
goes away, gets put in a back room somewhere, but have it somewhere. That could be the next push once you get it together, and that would be the citizens once they come and see it. Say, hey, we need to preserve this. We need to have this, permanently put somewhere where people will see it, or in one of the museums, or however they decide to do it, or build its own museum, for that purpose. So hopefully, what you're doing. I think what you're doing is it could lead to that, and all the work that you're putting into it, and really appreciate you doing that. It seems more like a labor of love now than just something you're doing on your job.
it is. It definitely has. Um, yeah, like I said before, it's been a full circle moment for me
Yeah.
because growing up hearing my grandfather, who grew up as a sharecropper in Brunswick County, him talking about his school experience, being in a one-room schoolhouse, having to walk to school, and then hearing from my former coworker about Union Kempsville and just all these different stories I've heard over the years, to actually have done this extensive research and to be able to put a spotlight on these people's lives um, has been rewarding. And yeah, and so I hope everybody is able to learn just a little bit more than what they knew before on this topic, and hopefully it will lead to more people doing research in their own cities and towns, and to search out that history, because that's definitely one of the things that I've learned through this process is there's not a lot always I'm able to find about a particular teacher or school because the records simply aren't there. And also on a larger scale, It's hard finding artifacts, especially from, you know, like the schools from the 1920s or previously to that. There's not a lot that's known so much about the school life, and so just trying to gather what I can find and put it in a way that you know people can value, and so and just also helping people to remember, like, it wasn't that long ago. All this stuff happened not that long ago. And that's what I find more and more every day as I've been researching is this stuff did not happen that long ago. People think it happened, over a century ago, and it's like, no, like school desegregation only happened, what, 50 years ago?
Yeah,
I mean, that's nothing. That is absolutely not nothing.
compared to the
So yeah,
history of the country. Yeah,
yes, the history of the country. But yeah, I mean, that's just a one person's lifetime. One person's lifetime, they experience going to a one-room schoolhouse to being then in an integrated school, you know, to yeah, I mean, and then seeing what it is today for students. That has to be, at least I know from my grandfather's experience, like that's always something that's kind of amazed him because he did grow up walking to school. He did walk. He walked to school. He
yeah,
remembers the potbelly stove. He remembers having to get water from a well outside of the school. Like he did all that sort of stuff.
yeah.
They,
And you know how that kind of sometimes used to turn into a joke where people would say, "Yeah, I had to sit there and listen to him say I walked to school with no shoes in the snow," and
yeah,
it wasn't too far from the truth, even though it sound
no,
and all those stories you hear and the history you find shouldn't have been a formula for success for the people that were involved. Now, I got I became right at the end of that. I mean, beginning of integration,
mm,
where integration started with me like 1965 to 66 here in Portsmouth when they started integration, Woodrow Wilson and Craddock. But before that, everybody black went to Norcom. And so when I came to high school, it was like 69. So it was still kind of new, but I didn't experience that walking, all those, miles to get to school. Because we had community schools. Every community had an elementary school. Your teachers lived in the community. So that was a formula for success. But when you hear the stories, it shouldn't be because we didn't have everything we needed. Uh, we didn't have everything that was necessary, but we really had everything we needed as far as the teachers
mm,
giving their all and teaching us beyond the classroom and preparing us for what kind of world we were about to face.
mhm,
So we were rich as far as that was concerned, but uh, it's a history well worth preserving and sharing with people and continue to dig deep and find what you can. Wouldn't it be interesting if we had cell phones back then and have recordings of those people actually saying, talking about their experience at that time? Because it's hard to find those people now. You can find descendants of them that give you information that their parents or grandparents passed down to them. But it's nothing like talking to somebody in their 90s or maybe 100 if they, can remember some of the things and actually tell you
mm,
this is what they experienced. And sometimes those people 90, they remember more about back then than they do about some of the
yeah,
present day things that
mhm,
go on. That's just how the mind works.
yeah,
But how much you say the exhibit is will be in August.
yes.
So you will continue to dig up until that point, or when will you get to the point where you say, okay, I think I have enough right now, or you never will come to that point where I have enough right now?
Well, on a personal level, I'll probably always continue to research because this has
Yeah,
just been very interesting to me. Um, but on a professional level, it has an
it
end date for
has
this
to be a deadline. Yeah.
project. My goal is to have it done by the end of the month.
Okay.
Yeah, to have it done by the end of the month, so then can start the process of, getting the actual exhibit together and having it installed. So, yeah.
Well, look, I appreciate you coming on, and I want you to come on again before the exhibit. Just giving us an update and just talking more about the history. Not giving everything about the exhibit. We want people to see it for the first time, but even knowing something, what some of the things you're telling us now is still. I believe when that exhibit is put together, it's still going to be amazing to witness, and people will gravitate towards that and really dig in deep, hopefully, and study their history, especially the history of their families, because you might even have some pictures and they go there. That looks like looks like
Yeah.
my granddad in that picture. And I know you've been reaching out trying to find people that uh, are related to some of the people you are studying. So I know that will continue, but uh, I appreciate you coming on, and I want to give you the last word. If you want to make any appeals to anybody that you might want to uh, talk to, or might have some information that might help you in what you're doing, you can make that appeal.
Okay. Thank you. I'm glad that I'm able to speak on this topic with you. If, as he said, I'm still looking for people to speak to. If you are related to Emmy L. Fitchett or Gertrude Horton Smith, um, please reach out to me. Um, my my contact info is lreed at cityofchesapeake.net. You can just email me or give me a call at 757-382-1313. And I would love to speak with you and to find out more information from you on these two particular teachers. And also, if you have photos, even better. But yeah, I have a wealth of educators that I've been looking at. As of right now, I believe it's about 32 teachers I have. So
How
um,
many of those 32 teachers are still living?
none of them, unfortunately.
None of them. They're all,
Yeah, none of
unfortunately,
them.
all of.
Um, yeah, the I think the one who died most recently was in the year 2000, I think 2000, 2001. But yeah, everybody has passed, unfortunately. And as some of the principals, so that was the teachers, but as far as the principals that I have also in that number, um, the most recent one that passed was in 2023. So,
Is,
so I'm like
is there any
just
way?
missing people. Mm,
Is there any way you can display some of those teachers' names, or you want to wait to the exhibit? The reason I ask that because there might be some students of
mm.
those teachers that might have something to say. I don't know. Maybe I
Yeah,
don't know. Maybe
yeah, I can definitely um, display those teachers. What do you just want me to say the
yeah.
names or?
Well, you can if you want to, you can send me some of the names or all of the names, and I can put them on my page and
Okay,
and
I'll do
and
that.
see if how many people will respond. I know sometime when we talk about non teachers and we put some of the teachers' names up there, I see all these people responding. Oh man, yeah, she was this and she was that. She lived right next door to me, you know, and you might get some interesting tidbits from actual students
Yeah.
that remember something that might help.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
It's all to say, 32 and all of them are gone. That's why it's so important to do this, because we need to pass whatever information we can find down about these teachers, so it will be ever ingrained in our history, and they need to be recognized, because I'm sure all 32 of them were awesome and dedicated and gave more than most would give, just to make sure they were educating and preparing the young minds to for the future. Yeah,
And they did.
yeah,
Um, all the teachers, the principals I've been researching, they all were very community oriented. I mean, I hearing from a lot of the descendants, a lot of the teachers, would go out of their own pocket to buy
yeah,
food for their students, making sure that their students had what they needed. um, and also to learning about more of the community input, especially from the churches and other local organizations. They
yeah,
all banded together to do what they had to do in order for these students to have success, in their educational journey.
yeah,
And so that should be highlighted. It really took a village for the schools to be as successful as they were. And like we spoke on earlier, there were several roadblocks, but people
mhm,
kept, overcoming that, and they kept achieving more and more, despite whatever obstacles were at hand at that time. Um, and so just that story of resilience, I think, is more important now, to know and to hear more than ever. And
yes,
it's a national story,
mhm,
this topic, but it's a local story as well.
yeah.
And
It starts local, once you get the
yeah.
people, because everybody had some kind of experience that.
Hmm.
Wow. And again, thanks a lot, and Godspeed to you, and continuing on with your research, and we'll come back. I appreciate again you agreeing to come on here, taking time out to do this. I think it's very important, the information you're sharing and the information you will display in August. That's going to be very significant, and I hope to be there. Thanks again. Thanks
Thank
everybody
you.
for watching. And if you're watching on Facebook, please make your comments. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, make sure you subscribe, and we look for your comments, and please share this information. Very important information. And look forward to having Ms. Reed back on, giving us updates leading up to the exhibit. So I know she's ready to share whatever she finds out. Like I said, it's a labor of love for her. So we can expect something no shorter than excellent. Thank you again. Take care.
Take care. Thank
We'll
you.
see you. I'll be in touch with you.
Okay. Awesome.